"You shouldn't be in here." The voice came from the doorway, and it was not the voice of a foreman. Leona Trevelyan had been inside the Glenvale Mill for 40 minutes before she heard it, long enough to photograph the original timber framing in the east stairwell, long enough to trace with her bare fingertips the inlay of the 1923 threshold stone, long enough to forget, briefly, that the mill was scheduled to come down in 11 days. She'd come in through the west foundation gap the way she always came in the blue dark before the site crew arrived, with her headlamp and her field notebook, and the particular guilt of a person who was doing something she had every moral right to do and no legal right to do at all. She turned around slowly, notebook in hand. The man standing in the doorway was not the security guard. The security guard was a 40-year-old named Bert who drove a white pickup and brought a thermos of Tim Hortons and never made it down from the main road before 6:30. It was 5:52. The man in the doorway was younger than Bert, early 40s at most, in a dark coat the color of lake water, with the kind of stillness that had nothing to do with being cold. "There's a gap in the foundation," Leona said, because there was no dignity in being caught mid-sentence and no sense in pretending otherwise. "West side, where the frost heave cracked the footings. You should have your site engineer look at it before the demolition crew goes in. If that section comes down wrong, you'll lose the whole north wall in an avalanche." The man studied her. She was 32 years old and 5'4", and wearing a canvas jacket that had seen better winters, and she was holding a Nikon D850 and a field notebook with a red spine, and she had not, she realized, offered a single word of apology. That was her father's fault. Tom Trevelyan had spent 28 years as the heritage custodian for the Glenvale district, back when the town of Haverstock still funded the position, and someone was still paid to know the difference between a load-bearing wall and a decorative one. He had walked Leona through every building on this block before she'd learned to drive. He had taught her to read the mill the way other fathers taught their daughters to read weather. She had a license and a title and a practice. She was Leona Trevelyan, heritage conservationist, and she was standing in a condemned building in a headlamp at 5:52 in the morning, because 11 days was not enough time to document what was about to be lost. Damon Westbrook, the man said. She knew the name. Everyone in Haverstock knew the name, because for 9 months it had been on the registered letters delivered to every address on Halcyon Street. The ones that used words like acquisition and redevelopment and vacant possession. The ones that had put her mother's 40 years of gardening catalogues into cardboard boxes. Leona could not walk past without her stomach going tight. Westbrook Group, the company that had bought the Glenvale Mill and the 5 heritage buildings surrounding it, and the whole of Halcyon Street's East Row, bought it the way another company might buy a parking lot, because what was underneath was worth less than what could replace it. Trevelyan, she said, and gave him nothing more. A crow called somewhere above the rafters. The morning light was coming in sideways through the old leaded glass window on the south wall, the way it only came in at this hour in late September, throwing amber bars across the original pine floor. It was the most beautiful light in Haverstock, Leona had always thought. It was also, she had been trying not to think on borrowed time. "There's a heritage assessment on file," Westbrook said. "It rated this building as having low cultural significance." "I know." She folded her notebook closed. "I also know who wrote it. Prentice Holst contracted Millwood & Associates, which is the same firm that signed off on the Beaumont Street teardown in 2019. That assessment missed the embedded ironwork on the upper story by 3 paragraphs. This one missed your grandfather's patent mark on the central beam." He went very still. Not the stillness of before, which had been a rich man's patience. This was different. She'd seen it in buildings, not in people. The moment a structure registered a load it hadn't been designed to hold. "My grandfather," he said. She crossed the floor, unhurried, because the boards were uneven and she knew which ones, and he didn't, and she put her hand flat on the central load-bearing beam, 7 inches above her head. Someone had painted it over twice since 1923, but under the paint, pressed into the timber with a cutter's stamp, was the mark. She'd found it 2 weeks ago. She'd been photographing it ever since. "Harold Westbrook," she said. "He built this mill in 1923. That's his maker's mark, HW with the running fox below. It's registered in the Federal Heritage Trades Index, one of 11 marks from that period still extant in Ontario." Westbrook crossed the floor in 4 steps and stood beside her and looked at his grandfather's mark in the amber light and said nothing for a long time. "That changes things," he said finally. It should, Leona said. Whether it will depends on who's doing the math. Outside, a truck engine turned over. Bert, right on schedule. The sound of someone coming down the site road, who was not going to be pleased about the next 5 minutes. Leona reached for her lens cap. "Don't," Westbrook said. She stopped. "Finish what you were doing. I'll handle Bert." She would think about that later. The simplicity of it, the way he said "I'll handle it" and went, and how the mill felt different once he was gone. Not emptier. More honest, somehow, the way a room feels when the person in it finally says the thing they'd been working up to. She photographed for another 22 minutes. She was back at her car, parked on the service road 3 blocks east, before he found her again. He'd come on foot. No truck, no assistant. He stood at the end of the road with his hands in his coat pockets and the whole grey Haverstock mourning behind him and said, "How much would it cost to make you a consultant instead of a trespasser?" The question landed the same way the maker's mark had landed, square and unmistakable. "You can't buy a heritage designation," Leona said, "if that's what you're asking." "It isn't." "Then say what you're asking." He looked at her for a moment in the way she'd already catalogued as his default expression. Flat, measuring, not unkind, but a long way from warm. The look of a man who had learned early that everything took longer than it should and that patience was more useful than charm. "I need someone who can read these buildings properly. The assessment on file is being challenged by the provincial office. If there's a federal heritage element on that beam, my timeline for the whole site is at risk, and I'd rather know the shape of the problem than have it find me in court." He paused. "I'm also told there's a Trevelyan on the Halcyon Street list." Her jaw did not move. She had learned long ago to keep it still. "Number 12, she said. "My mother's house. My father built the side porch himself. There's a date on the possession notice. 8 weeks. Westbrook looked at her steadily. "Get me through the heritage assessment. A proper one, defensible, not Millward's. And I'll take the possession date off number 12, off the schedule entirely. In writing, this morning, before you leave the site." Leona looked at the mill over his shoulder. The south window was still catching the light, and from the road she could see the leaded glass glinting, amber and green and old. Her mother had watered her tomatoes this morning, same as every morning. Her mother did not know yet what Leona had found on that beam. Her mother did not know about the Heritage Trades Index or the federal designation, or what either of those things might mean for a letter with a date on it that was sitting on the kitchen table under a geranium pot. "You didn't know about the mark," Leona said. "You bought this entire block and you had a heritage assessment done, and nobody told you your own grandfather built the mill." "No," Westbrook said. He said it without apology and without softening. "I didn't." She had been lied to so carefully and so often in the past 9 months. By the acquisition notices with their clean legal language, by the heritage board that had sat on her objection for 6 weeks without scheduling a hearing, that a flat truth felt like something she could actually hold. 8 weeks, she said. "My mother's notice says 8 weeks. 54 days. He didn't blink at the precision. She got the sense he respected it. "I'll need full access to all 5 buildings. Original purchase records if you have them, and the Millward assessment, unredacted." "Done." "I don't work for you," she said. "I work for the buildings. If what I find says the mill should come down, I'll tell you that. If it says it shouldn't, I'll tell the provincial office, the federal board, and anyone else who'll sit still long enough to listen." Something shifted in his face, not displeasure, recalibration. "That's what I'm paying for," he said. She put out her hand. He shook it. His grip was warm and dry, and she let go first, because she didn't trust herself not to catalogue it the way she catalogued old timber, looking for the grain, looking for the hold. The letter was on the desk in his site office by 8:15. 4 sentences, typed and signed. The possession schedule for 12 Halcyon Street suspended indefinitely pending heritage assessment review by direct order of D. Westbrook, Westbrook Group. She read it twice. She asked for a copy. She got one still warm from the printer. She sat in her car on the service road for a moment before she drove away and let herself breathe. Then she drove to her mother's house. Alma Trevelyan was on the side porch her husband had built, a mug in one hand and a seed catalogue in the other, and she looked up at her daughter arriving at 8:30 in a canvas jacket with pine shavings on her sleeve, and said nothing at first, because Alma Trevelyan had learned somewhere in her 68 years that the first thing you said was rarely the most useful. "I've been inside the mill," Leona said. "I know." "You knew?" You've been going every morning for 2 weeks. You park on Elgin and walk. Your boots are always damp at noon. Leona sat down on the porch steps. The morning was turning golden over the old rooftops, the kind of September gold that apologizes for leaving. I found something, she said. Harold Westbrook's maker's mark, on the central beam. He built the mill in 1923, Mom. The Westbrook who's been sending the notices, it's his grandfather's building. Her mother set down the catalogue. And he wants to hire me. A proper heritage assessment. In exchange, she held out the copy of the letter. He took your notice off the schedule. Alma read it slowly, the way she read prescriptions. Twice, lips barely moving as though the words might change between passes. Then she folded it carefully and held it in her lap. Your father shook hands with Bob Carlton on that porch in 2001, she said. Bob told him the custodian's position was permanent, part of the district trust. Told him number 12 was ours as long as a Trevelyan wanted to live in it. You know what a handshake on a porch is worth when the trust gets dissolved and the lawyers come? Leona had gone cold in the warm morning. Mom. Nothing, sweetheart. Not a thing. Alma smoothed the folded letter with one thumb. So don't build your whole autumn on 4 typed sentences from a man who bought this street like a line item. She wasn't wrong. Leona knew she wasn't wrong. She had sat in that lawyer's office 6 months ago and learned exactly what not on paper meant. But she also thought of the way Westbrook had looked at his grandfather's mark in the amber light, the way the stillness had changed. She didn't say that, not yet. I know what I'm doing, she said instead. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. The tomatoes were staked along the south wall, red and orange against the white clapboard. The side porch listed slightly where the frost had pushed at the footings, the same frost that pushed at everything on Halcyon Street every March. I know you do, Alma said. That's what I'm afraid of. Prentice Holst arrived at the mill site on a Thursday, in a car too clean for a dirt road, with a tablet and a manner that suggested the tablet was the more important of the two. He was 40-something and smooth-jawed, and his jacket fit the way jackets fit when someone else worried about them, and he introduced himself to Leona in the mill's front room with a smile that was entirely teeth and entirely not warmth. The heritage consultant. He said it the way you'd say the hobby, pleasant and slightly amused. Damon mentioned he'd brought someone in locally. That's a nice touch, actually. Community engagement. I'm doing the heritage assessment, Leona said. Not engagement. Of course. The smile didn't waver, though between us, and I do think honesty is the kindest policy, a federal designation on this property would complicate things significantly. The Ashfield Capital Partnership, the resort timeline, the Halcyon redevelopment, all of it. He tilted his head. I'd hate for your findings to accidentally tip the wrong ones. Heritage findings aren't accidental, Leona said. They're documented. Everything's documented, Holst said cheerfully. Millwood documented a low significance rating on this property 8 months ago. Millwood missed the maker's mark. Millwood determined the mark was outside the assessment scope. Leona looked at him. That's not how federal heritage law works. That, Holst said, is a matter of interpretation, which is exactly why I think you and I should have a proper conversation before your findings go anywhere official. He glanced around the old mill room with the mild disinterest of someone calculating how many square feet it represented. There's a diner on the highway. I'll buy you a coffee. She went because she needed to know the shape of it. The diner on Route 7 was called the Ridgeback, and it smelled of bacon and maple syrup and the specific sweetness of a griddle that had been doing its job for 30 years. Holst sat across from her in a vinyl booth and ordered nothing, and opened his tablet and turned it to face her, the way Westbrook had turned the 4-sentence letter, and she had the vertiginous feeling of 2 men offering her 2 versions of the same story from opposite ends. Westbrook Group's purchase of the Glenvale site, Holst said, was financed in partnership with Ashfield Capital, standard arrangement, commercial development. What you may not know, because there's no reason you would, is that there's a performance covenant in the partnership agreement. He tapped the screen. Demolition and groundbreaking on the Glenvale parcels must occur before the 4th quarter funding milestone. That milestone is 10 weeks out. Leona kept her face still. If a federal heritage designation is triggered, Holst continued, demolition is automatically stayed pending review. Heritage review in this province runs 6 to 18 months minimum. The milestone can't be met. The funding covenant is triggered, and Ashfield Capital assumes majority control of the Glenvale development. He closed the tablet gently, including the Halcyon parcels. including number 12. So if I do my job, Leona said slowly, Westbrook loses control of the site, and the letter he signed about my mother's house becomes worth whatever Ashfield Capital decides it's worth. Which is not nothing. Holst's smile had settled into something almost sympathetic. Ashfield is a professional organization. They'll honor reasonable commitments. But I want to be transparent with you. They didn't sign that letter, Damon did. And Damon's authority over those parcels is conditional on him remaining the controlling partner. If the designation triggers the covenant, he loses control. He loses control. Leona sat with her iced tea and did not drink it, and thought about how her mother had folded the 4-sentence letter along its creases, careful as a promise she'd been handed before. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Holst blinked as though the question surprised him. "Because I'd like you to understand the full picture," he said. "You want the designation to fail. You want the groundbreaking to happen on schedule. If I document properly and trigger the federal review, Ashfield takes over. Which is exactly what you want, because Ashfield is who you answer to." A pause. "So what nail are you looking for in the wall you just showed me?" That landed. She watched it land. Something behind his professional pleasantness shifted. Not quite respect, but the acknowledgement that she had seen a thing he'd expected her to miss. "Heal the mill," he said at last, almost gently. "Document the heritage value properly. Let the designation happen. You'll be doing your job, the buildings will be protected, and your mother's house, well." He folded his hands on the table. "Whether the letter holds or doesn't, you'll know you did the honest thing. And I'll be the reasonable one who told you the truth in a diner on Route 7. She drove home through the sugar maples going orange and gold, and she sat in the car in front of her mother's house for 4 minutes before she went inside. The tomatoes were still on the south wall. The porch her father had built was still listing slightly to the east. That evening, Westbrook texted her from a number she recognized now, the way she'd learned to recognize the sound of his footstep on the mill's uneven floor. "There's something in the lower level you should see before the crew goes in. Sunrise tomorrow. I'll be there." She went, of course she went. He was at the east stairwell when she came in through the foundation gap. A work light set up throwing white shadows across the old stonework, and he was standing at the foot of the stairs with his hands in his pockets, looking at something on the wall. "You know about Holst," she said. "It wasn't a question. He called me last night. And I've been in this business long enough to know what it means when my development director has a coffee meeting with my heritage consultant." Leona crossed the floor to stand beside him. On the wall, almost invisible under 60 years of whitewash, was a framed architectural drawing. Hand-drawn ink on linen. The original mill plans mounted under glass that someone at some point had thought to protect. Harold Westbrook's signature was in the bottom right corner. The date was March 1923. "I found it yesterday," Westbrook said, "after you left." She leaned close. The plans were detailed, more detailed than anything Millwood had filed. The structural logic of the central beam was there, clear as a blueprint could be. The load distribution, the maker's mark, explained in a marginal note in the old man's handwriting. "This mark is placed here so that whoever comes after will know what held the roof up. H.W." Leona's throat closed. She pressed it back. "This is federal heritage documentation," she said when she could. "Original plans by the original builder, in situ. This alone could trigger the designation review." "I know. The covenant says if it triggers, Ashfield takes the site." "I know that too." She turned and looked at him. In the white worklight, he was sharper than in the amber morning, every line of his face visible, and she was starting to learn how to read it. The jaw that tightened under pressure, the very slight pause before he said something he'd decided, rather than something he'd been prepared to say. "Holst told me about the funding covenant," she said. "He told me your authority over these parcels is conditional. He told me that if the designation goes through, you lose the site, and my mother's letter goes with it." "He told you the truth. Then why bring me here to look at this?" A long pause. The work light hummed. Outside, a car went past on the main road, its headlights sweeping through the south window, amber then gone. "Because my grandfather built this mill," Westbrook said finally, "and the assessment I paid for missed his name on the wall. And because I've spent 6 years building things and tearing down other things, and telling myself the math worked out even when I could feel that it didn't." He looked at the plans. "I hired you to read the buildings, not to tell me what I wanted to hear." She heard the thing under the thing. She always had. It was the reason she was good at her work and poor at leaving it at the office. "There's more," she said. She led him to the lower level, where she'd been working for 2 weeks, the original foundation room, the oldest part of the mill. In the northeast corner, packed behind a collapsed shelf unit, were 16 rolls of architectural drawings. Different paper, different era, later 1960s, maybe 70s. She'd unrolled 3 of them last Tuesday. She'd been turning what she'd found over in her mind ever since. "These are Harold Westbrook's later drawings," she said. "Not the mill, the Halcyon Street row. He designed those houses, the ones your company's been noticing out. He filed the original heritage covenant with the town in 1974. Westbrook said nothing. "A heritage covenant," Leona said carefully, "is different from a heritage designation. A designation is a government finding. A covenant is a legal agreement between the property owner and a recognized heritage body, registered on title. It runs with the land. It can't be dissolved by a sale." She looked at him. "If your grandfather filed a valid covenant on the Halcyon Street properties in 1974, then Westbrook Group didn't acquire those properties free and clear. The covenant is still on title. Every possession notice you sent to Halcyon Street is legally unenforceable." The silence stretched out long enough that she could hear the mill's old weather vane turning on the roof, the brass protest of it in the October wind. "He never told anyone," Westbrook said at last. "The covenant is registered. Anyone could find it. She chose the word carefully. No one was looking in the right drawer." She watched him, the jaw, the pause. "Holst knows about the funding covenant," he said slowly. "He doesn't know about this one." "No, I don't think he does." Westbrook looked at the rolled drawings for a long moment, and she saw it happen. The recalibration, the calculation she was learning to distinguish from the rare moments when something genuine broke through. This was genuine. "If I present this at the Heritage Board," he said, "I trigger the designation on the mill and validate the existing covenant on Halcyon Street. Ashfield loses their demolition authority entirely. The 4th quarter milestone can't be met on any of the parcels." "Yes." "And the funding covenant triggers. Control passes to Ashfield. Of the Glenvale development, not of Halcyon Street. The covenant on Halcyon is on title, independent of your partnership structure. It protects those houses regardless of who holds the development notes." He was quiet. "So I lose the company's hold on Glenvale," he said. "And your mother's house is protected by a covenant my grandfather filed 50 years ago without telling anyone." "Your grandfather left you something in these drawings," Leona said. "He just assumed you'd go looking." She left him in the lower level with the plans and the work light and the sound of the weather vane. She drove home and did not sleep, and lay in her childhood bed in the room at the back of number 12 and listened to the wind in the old maples and thought about nails in walls. At 2:17 in the morning, her phone lit up on the nightstand. Holst's number. "The Heritage Board has moved the assessment presentation up. Thursday morning before the board convenes, not next month. This Thursday, 6 days. Damon will get the formal notice in the morning. Thought you should hear it from me first. Ask him what he's planning to do. Watch his face when he answers." She sat up in the dark with her phone in her hand and the wind in the maples and understood. He moved the timeline because he found out about the mill plans. He needed this done before Damon could present them. She texted Westbrook at 6. "He moved the hearing this Thursday. He knows about the plans." The reply came in under 3 minutes. "I know. Meet me at the mill, 6:30. He was already there when she arrived. Not at the east stairwell, not at the lower level. He was at the south window, standing in the early morning light, the amber light, the leaded glass light, the one that only came at this hour in autumn and would not come this way again after Thursday. "He wants to get ahead of it," Westbrook said when she came in. "If the hearing is Thursday morning before the board convenes, Millwood's assessment is still the official document of record. My authorization to present new materials requires board approval, which requires a quorum." He turned from the window, "which Holst has made sure won't be seated until after the presentation window closes. So the mill gets demolished on the original schedule, and the covenant question on Halcyon Street never gets raised," Leona said. "That's the plan." "Is it going to work?" He looked at her the way she'd come to recognize, flat and direct and underneath, something that was learning to be honest about how much it wanted a specific answer. "No," he said, "because my grandfather was on the Heritage Board in 1974, which means he had standing to file the covenant as a board member, not just as a property owner, which means the covenant was filed in the board's own records. He let that sit. Records that are kept at the municipal archives on the same hall as the hearing room. Leona understood. You present the covenant from the board's own archives, she said slowly. And it doesn't require Holst's timeline or Millwood's assessment or a quorum to admit. It's already in the official record. The board has to acknowledge it. It's been sitting in their files for 50 years, Westbrook said. They just haven't read it. She thought of her father, who had spent 28 years knowing every nail and beam of this district, and had been let go with a letter and a handshake and no recourse when the budget changed. She thought of her mother folding the possession notice into a small square, the way she folded things she didn't want to look at again. She thought of Mrs. Dre from number 9, who was 81, and had lived on Halcyon since before Leona was born, and who had said at the community meeting 6 months ago, in a voice as dry as July, if they wanted us gone, they should have said so plain instead of dressing it up in Latin. Thursday, she said. Thursday. She spent the next 5 days in the mill. She documented every room, every beam, every sill, every threshold stone, every marginal note in Harold Westbrook's handwriting on every plan. She wrote a heritage assessment that was 47 pages and would hold up in any court in the province. She did it for the buildings. That was still true. But somewhere in the 5th day, she stopped pretending it was only for the buildings. The night before the hearing, she sat on the side porch at number 12 and listened to the wind change direction and smelled the cold coming in from the north and thought about all the reasons not to trust a man who had sent her mother a possession notice. She thought about what Holst had said. Watch his face when he answers. You'll see I'm the honest one in all this. She thought about what Westbrook had said to the mill plans, to the wall, and not to her. I hired you to read the buildings, not to tell me what I wanted to hear. She thought about a maker's mark pressed into a beam in 1923 and uncovered in 2024 by accident, by touch, by a woman who had learned to look for the things that held the roof up. Her mother came out with 2 mugs of tea and handed one over without a word. I don't know if he'll do the right thing tomorrow, Leona said. I've read the building. I'm less sure about the man. That's the same thing your father used to say, Alma said. Every time he had to talk to someone from City Hall, he'd say, the buildings tell the truth, but people are a different kind of structure. You have to find the load-bearing part and test it. Did he always find it? No, Alma sipped her tea, but he always tested it. That was the point. She wore her good jacket to the hearing, navy blue, the one she'd bought for the Provincial Preservation Conference 3 years ago. Her father had told her once, if you want someone to hear what you're saying about a building, make sure they see the building when they look at you. The Heritage Board met in the old Municipal Hall on Champlain Street, and Leona arrived at 8:40 for a 9 o'clock hearing and found the room already half full. Holst was at the front table in his oyster jacket with Millwood's assessor beside him and a clean printed copy of the low significance rating ready to go. He saw her come in and nodded pleasantly, the way you nod at someone you've already outmaneuvered. Westbrook was not in the room. At 8:59, the board chair opened the session, and Holst was halfway through his introduction when the door at the back opened, and Damon Westbrook walked in carrying a cardboard archival box and the rolled plans from the lower level, and he walked directly to the document table and set them down, without asking permission from anyone. I have records I'd like to enter under Rule 14, he said to the chair, not loudly. The room heard him anyway. Original Heritage Covenant filed by Harold Westbrook, board member, March 1974, registered on title for the Halcyon Street properties, and original architectural documentation from the Glenvale Mill, including the builder's plans and federal trademarks, indicating significance under Schedule 2 of the Heritage Act. Holst had gone very still. The board chair leaned forward. Mr. Westbrook, the presentation window for this session. Rule 14, Westbrook repeated calmly, allows any board member in good standing, or their legal heir, to introduce documented heritage records from the board's own archives at any point in an active proceeding. Harold Westbrook was a member of this board. I am his only living heir. A pause. I've already filed the standing claim. It's in your clerk's inbox. Leona watched Holst's face. She had read enough structures to know when a load-bearing element was failing. The calculation was happening behind his eyes. The recalculation, the swift and silent adjustment of a plan that had been working perfectly until it wasn't. You wrote a covenant into the title, Holst said to Westbrook, low and flat and entirely dropped of pleasantness. You built yourself a door in the cage you signed. My grandfather did, Westbrook said. I'm just the one who went looking in the right drawer. The board chair was reviewing documents. The archival box was open on the table. The hearing ran for 2 hours, and at the end of it the board voted to accept the heritage documentation and forward both the designation and the covenant registration to the provincial office for confirmation. Holst was out of the room before the vote concluded. The Ashfield Capital Funding Covenant triggered as written 3 business days later. Control of the Glenvale development transferred to Ashfield. Westbrook Group retained the consulting contract and the archival rights and not much else. Leona was on the side porch at number 12 when Westbrook walked up the path at 4 in the afternoon. He was in his dark coat and he had the cardboard archival box under his arm, and he looked, she thought, like a man who had set down something very heavy and was still feeling the absence of the weight. Holst says you cost me $40 million, he said when he reached the steps. Holst cost you $40 million, Leona said. By structuring a covenant, he forgot had a second door. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, the ghost of one. He sat down on the step below her, uninvited, the way people sit when they're too tired to stand. He looked out at the old rooftops of Halcyon Street, going gold in the late afternoon. Your mother's house is protected, he said. The covenant's in the provincial registry. It doesn't matter what Ashfield does with the Glenvale parcels now. Halcyon is separate. It's on title. I know. My grandfather built those houses, he said, and filed that covenant and didn't tell anyone, including his son, including me. He turned the archival box over on his knees once. I've been in this business since I was 26. I've bought and sold buildings all over this province. And I never, he stopped. You never went looking, she said. I never went looking. He said it without excusing it, which she had come to understand was the only version of honesty he had. It was not comfortable honesty. It was the kind that cost something. She looked at him for a long time. The load-bearing part of him. Not the coat, not the flat assessing eyes, not the careful speech. The thing underneath. The thing that had turned to a wall at 5:52 in the morning and looked at a maker's mark and gone still. Your grandfather left something in the lower level of his own mill, she said, for whoever came next, assuming they'd go looking. I almost didn't find it. But you did. A bird called from the maple at the corner of the yard. The October light went amber and then copper, and the old houses on Halcyon Street held it the way old things hold warmth, slowly and for longer than they should. The assessment you wrote, Westbrook said, the 47 pages. They'll go to the provincial office with the designation. They should be published. The work your father did for this district, it should be in those pages too. The custodian's records, the maintenance logs, all of it. He looked at her. I'll fund it, not as a development project, as a record. She didn't answer right away. She was thinking of her father in this house, in this yard, on this porch he'd built on a handshake and a man's word that turned out to be worth exactly what it was written on, which was nothing. And she was thinking of a mark in a beam that had waited 100 years for someone to go looking. Some things waited, some things held. You'll have to learn the names, she said. All 5 buildings, all the families on Halcyon. If you're funding a historical record, you learn the names before you write the first page. He looked at her. Something that was not quite the ghost muscle moved in his face. The real thing, finding its way back. Starting with Trevelyan, he said, number 12. She put out her hand, cold from the October air and steady. He took it, and neither of them let go quite as fast as either of them meant to. Her mother appeared in the doorway behind them with the inevitability of a woman who had been listening from the kitchen and had decided the moment was right. There's soup on, Alma Trevelyan said, looking at the two of them on her porch steps in the late afternoon light, with an expression that was equal parts suspicious and relieved. It'll keep for another 20 minutes. After that it won't, and I won't apologize for it. She went back inside. Westbrook looked at Leona. Your mother, he said. She came with the house, Leona said. I think you bought her with the covenant. And down the street, a wind moved through the old maples and the weather vane on the mill gave its brass protest to the sky. And the whole of Halcyon Street smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves and the particular cold that arrives in Ontario in October and means, if you know how to read it, that something is about to hold. The heritage designation was confirmed the following spring. The Glenvale Mill was restored over 14 months by a crew that included one of Leona's former students from the conservation program at Carleton. and 2 retired carpenters from Haverstock who had known her father by name. The maker's mark was uncovered, cleaned, and documented in the final report. Harold Westbrook, builder, 1923. The running fox below. The lower-level drawings were framed and hung in the mill's entrance, behind glass that was better than the original, but tried not to show it. Leona still went in through the south entrance every morning, because the light through the leaded glass was still the best light in Haverstock, and she was not about to give it up. Only now there was no foundation gap to navigate, and the door had a key she kept on the same ring as her front door. Some mornings, a voice came from the upper level. "You're early. The light's only good for 20 minutes, she'd call back. "I know, I've been informed." She was always already photographing by the time he came down the stairs. She had stopped cataloguing his footstep as he descended. That had been the first thing she'd let go, the professional reflex, the measuring of gait and weight, and what a body was compensating for. She had let herself hear it the other way instead, the way you hear a sound that belongs in a place. In the way that some structures, when you know them well enough, stop being things you read and become things that simply hold you. That her father had told her once is when you know it's yours. The mill was hers, Halcyon Street was hers. The man coming down the stairs had known it before she had. He had gone looking in the right drawer and found it there, waiting, the same way all the best things waited, patient and certain and entirely indifferent to the people who almost didn't go looking. The light came through the old glass, amber and green and old. Leona lifted her camera, and the morning began again.